It's an absolute pleasure for me to be here again. I think in a way, my PhD started by being here. So it's really nice to be here after I finished the PhD. And I gave a talk at 2017 in the same venue. And I remember starting that talk by saying that being in this community feels a bit like family to me. And you know what? After all these years, after having a collection of custom-made badges at home, that feeling is still the same. So that's very nice. Thank you so much for inviting me. Okay, so I was reflecting back on ThingsCon 2017 by preparing to this talk, and I think we have been talking about the past so much. I feel like we are getting older. So I was wondering what has changed since then, apart from me aging. And by the way, I have the perfect data visualization at home of all the years that have passed for ThingsCon, because I was pregnant the first time, and now my kid is 8 years old. So it's like, yes, I know exactly, data vis. So the technology has changed quite a lot. Back then, I just started to work on a project that included machine learning to analyze data collected from sensors around the home, and now not only we see that that is quite pervasive, but also AI is part of our everyday lives. Back in 2017, these were the kind of things I was doing, because although I am now a researcher, my career has not been very linear, to say. I worked as an interaction designer, as a curator, as a UX manager in Bosch, and I always maintained a kind of design practice around critical design. Around that time, also 2017, I started working at TU Delft, and together with other people, with Iskander, Nasli, Elisa, and others, we were developing methods for designing with things. And we were really fascinated by what you can learn when you look at the words and from the perspective of things. And you can learn a lot about people, you can learn a lot about everyday practices. And it was funny because at that time, a lot of the products, IoT kind of products, were showing the product and some hands of people around. And when we put a camera from the perspective of the thing and looked out, what you could see is actually people and what they do. So it was really like kind of decentering the perspective, decentering the human in some way, but also in a way decentering this focus we had on products and looking at practices and kind of humans around. And we were not the only ones fascinated by looking from the perspective of things. I think Simone also showed here the kind of helmet that is called Objective Realities. It's also a great project that looks at a room from the perspective of everyday objects like a Roomba. So at that time, I was also really fascinated by how we could talk to things, what would things say about us, but also what they will say without us. And in this movie we made with Marcel and Harm at that time, we asked what would everyday things infer from our behavior when they had intelligence. So this is what we made, and I think it's not far from what is going on, Yeah. It was fun, right? It's so much fun. Yeah, so at that time I was also thinking about how we could avoid being recognized and tracked by technologies, and what would be the sensitivities designers need to develop in the future to make sense and make visible the mistakes of machine learning and machine vision. So that was back then, but fast forward to 2024. Technology started to respond, to talk to us, bringing new opportunities, but also many new questions. In 2019, I started my PhD, and I decided to focus on conversational AI, from physical devices like Alexa and Siri, Google Home, and to chatbots like ChatGPT more recently. My two boys were really interested in this. I think the fifth word my youngest boy learned, we believe it was Alexa. And Yeah, so at the beginning, I really focused on the physical devices. Who has one of these at home? Raise your hands. Who has Anna? Yeah, maybe in a drawer, right? Already. Yeah, so I wonder what's the most common phrase in your home, because in my home, this is always the most common one. While it's fun to interact with these devices, one realizes very quickly that they have many technical limitations. The field is advancing rapidly. Today, voice assistants are integrating generative AI, so it's really getting exciting, the field. But there are still many challenges, and some of them are not technical. In relation to society, it has been studied how conversational AI can reinforce harmful biases and perpetuate outdated stereotypes. In relation to the environment, the training, operating, and maintaining AI systems has a high environmental impact. One estimation shows that an average session in ChatGPT uses half a liter of clean water and the electricity of 14 LED bulbs for an hour. And in fact, environmental and societal challenges are not separate but intersected. This is an example that is really close to my heart because it's situated where I was born in Argentina. One of the valuable resources in AI is lithium, which is extracted there in Argentina in the lithium triangle. This extraction takes place in a context shaped by a history of colonialism, which adds another layer of complexity. In Argentina, many indigenous communities don't have property titles to the lands, but they were granted rights to the lands under what is called the Ancestral Territories Constitution of 1994. However, these protections have been recently removed to favor the extraction of lithium, and this is called in the region the white gold. So it is a very exciting time now to talk about what conversations we want to have with and about technology, and to rethink some of the questions I had back then in 2017. Small questions like, what does being human mean today? And especially I'm interested in this question. When we talk about human-centered AI, which humans are in the center and which voices are actually marginalized? So this is what the talk will be about. So to address that question and study conversational AI as a socio-technical system, I use this particular approach, and I want to talk a bit about that. It's called More Than Human Design. It has always been proposed as an alternative to human-centered design, which has been the prevalent approach for the last decades in design. Human-centered design had many advantages for designers in understanding human needs and values, but its narrow focus on humans has led designers to often overlook how the solutions they produced have impacted the planet and people who are not direct users. And I think given the environmental and societal challenges we are facing, it seems urgent for designers to explore new approaches and to move beyond anthropocentrism. So to ask, what if human-centered design is not the answer to our problems, but is in itself part of the problem? Especially when we zoom out to the extractivist landscape of AI that happens at different levels, from materials to knowledge, it becomes clear that a narrow focus on human needs can be limiting for engaging with AI. In this space, we need new approaches that can tackle AI's challenges in an inclusive and sustainable way. More Than Human Design emerges here as a promising avenue for studying and designing AI as a socio-technical system, because in contrast to human-centered design, this approach questions human exceptionalism and offers a relational perspective, acknowledging that humans, non-humans, and the environment are always entangled. So this was the approach I used for my PhD. I call this approach, or this way of designing with AI. So it's not just using AI as a tool, but developing this kind of relational understanding of AI and using it in that way to design. And particularly, I focus on this question. This is a bit academic, sorry. It's a bit like a research question for a PhD dissertation. You need to excuse me for being the academic nowadays in the room, but how might a more than human design approach be assembled and mobilized in the context of AI to enable design researchers, and I think designers more generally, to engage with entangled relations between humans and non-humans within AI as socio-technical systems. So while my PhD engaged with these complex issues, I didn't mean to provide an exhaustive account of AI's impact or to map its relations comprehensively. I think that will need a multidisciplinary effort. My inquiry was more modest. I wanted to highlight specific instances where entangled relations manifest in interactions with AI in everyday life and propose alternative avenues for designing AI within a more than human approach. To explore that, I used a sort of process that is called research through design. And this means for me that the knowledge was generating through the making of things. I combined more than human techniques with critical design. The research is quite experimental, engages with a diverse range of formats, including workshops, performances, podcasts, prototypes, and I will show some of them. One of the first activities I did was a workshop at a conference in 2020 with 36 participants, and this included researchers from different fields and designers that worked actually at the companies that develop conversational agents. Particularly Amazon. In the workshop, we conducted interviews with CAs, so with conversational agents. We actually interviewed them like people. But we also enacted speculative conversations and prototyped speculative bodies for them. Among the many insights of the workshops, I think one that is very important for me is that the limitations of conversational agents is to show the limitations of conversational agents to talk about their own biases, what they don't know, what they can't do. They cannot talk about their infrastructures and their extractivist practices. They could not reveal their positionality, how they were trained, who owned them, and why they all had female voices. Later, I did other experiments to explore how conversations and silences also could be decentered and decolonized. For example, this performance was done in a theater with 5 artists and 2 Alexas, and we improvised on stage. And artists, are really good with kind of expanding understanding. So I think what I got is also an expanded understanding of what a conversation is. It's not only verbal, it's not only based on language, but also movement and bodies and care and many other things. Other experiments I did was to craft kites as a way to have silent conversations with non-humans, in this case water. So it was a series of kites for different elements, wind, but also seeds, water. So that was a way to embody these silent conversations and see how it feels to kind of what is to kind of feel the forces of non-humans without having to talk to them with language, with human language. Later, I programmed Alexas to kind of share something about their previous lives or their infrastructures. So I deployed conversations as skills in Alexas, and they were based on the kind of past, their infrastructure. So when someone asked Alexa, what is the temperature now? It would say, it's 15 degrees in Amsterdam, 8 degrees Celsius lower from the place where I was assembled. So it was kind of referring back to where has it been. And the last thing I did was a series of prototypes, physical prototypes, which I showed here, I believe last year. And this was using the metaphor of growing, so they are called conversation starters. It's using this idea of growing kind of living organisms to explore different practices around understanding AI, and especially focusing on how we could misunderstand AI better. So these are some of the prototypes. It was like a fictional scenario of what if conversational agents could listen and respond to more than human voices around the home. Yeah, I showed that at Dutch Design Week. The most common feedback was like, oh, this smells really, really bad. It smells like kombucha. It's like, yeah, that's what kombucha smells like. Yeah, and as part of that, I also created a series of more than human bedtime stories, because in that fiction, the agents were listening to sounds around the home and creating stories with that. And so we created lots of these very nice stories that are compiled in a book. And these were not just generated with ChatGPT, and at that time it was ChatGPT 2. It was a combination of people and the algorithm, but the people were also they had something to say about these stories. For example, this is by my brother and his wife, and she's a teacher at school, so she had an idea of what kind of stories would be interesting for kids, so it was a very nice experiment. Okay. So these are some of the experiments I did, and I think in general the PhD offers conceptual and practical tools for designers and researchers who want to engage with more than human design. And so some of the actual tools that I made, or like resources that I made, are, for example, this podcast that it's like an exercise on noticing. Noticing is a more than human technique, I would say, method. And in this podcast, I try to bring that closer to designers, and it's a kind of meditation kind of journey that invites people to go out and notice. And this is based also on the research on deep listening and decolonial listening, so it allows different ways of listening to the world. So in terms of what I learned from all these experiments, these are a few things that I learned. Silences, which initially seemed like passive moments in the interactions with these devices, with conversational agents, became actually active moments of silencing. Why? Because conversational agents filter out non-human voices as background noise. But because they listen better to certain accents than others, they silence many human voices too. I also learned that AI agents should not only explain what they can do, but also what they cannot do, so people can calibrate their own trust. And in that space, misunderstandings and failures emerged as important moments, as opportunities that allow people to understand the limitations of these technologies and to calibrate their trust themselves. This has implications for responsible AI, and one of them is for the field of explainability, which is a subfield that wants to make sure that the decisions of AI are understandable for humans. In this field, users are normally neutral things, and because of that, this framework often makes assumptions about what needs to be explained and for whom. Fundamentally, it assumes that developers need to explain AI to passive users. But in reality, when people interact with conversational agents, they are very active in trying to understand what agents can or cannot do. So if you have a device like this at home, or also with ChatGPT, it's like people often try to see its limits by interacting, by trying to contest it, by trying to do things that are like a bit in the margins. So people are very active in doing that. So if we take a more than human design approach to explainability, people and also agents become active participants in building situated and plural understandings of AI. In that approach, also misunderstandings and failures, instead of being problems to solve, become opportunities for supported situated AI. So using the context of conversational agents and AI, my research provided an example of one of the main limitations of human-centered design. That is that when we center on humans, not much is said about which humans are centered and which ones are excluded. When designers talk about users or humans, these are not neutral terms, in fact. They actually prioritize white, male, European, and able-bodied ideals. Thus, my research revealed that anthropocentric approaches are not only limiting for designing interactions with AI, but they can also be risky, as they can compromise inclusivity. To address that, my recommendation is to design situated interactions with AI. And for that, it's important to account for the positionality, for the position in the world of people implicated by AI, not only the direct users. The positionality of the agents, because they also bring their word views. When they have a female voice, it means something. And the positionality of the designers or developers of AI, because we also embed our own biases. So while my research provided recommendations for designing AI, the main contribution is actually in the field of more than human design. And there I showed how post-human theory can support more than human design, especially in being more precise on what we mean when we talk about decentering. Decentering is a common term in more than human design. It's like we decenter the human. It's like, what do we really mean when we talk about decentering? For that, I found very useful the work of the feminist philosopher Rosi Braidotti. And I think this can really support designers in thinking about like what is really decentered. She explains that posthumanism is a convergence of two critiques. One that challenges anthropocentrism, and the other that questions the normative European and humanist construction of the human as men, white, and able. So as a convergence, more than human design is an approach that challenges human-centeredness on the one hand and questions the humanist conception of the user on the other. And I think this is novel because it highlights that more than human design is important not just because we care about other species, but because we care about humans too. So that was theory, but actually my research was about how more than human design can be practiced. And I think here, this is important to share in this community especially. Because in my PhD, I showed how in human-computer interaction or in design research, designers have developed unique ways of doing more than human design. They have developed methods, examples. And when I started the PhD, there were a few books on more than human design. Since then, there are a lot more. A lot. But none of them actually show applications in the real world. And this is becoming a problem. In 2023, together with Arne and Joe, we organized a track to try to bring this into practice. We had 50 submissions of really great work of researchers, design researchers that bring that into practice. However, this is still academia. And I think what is needed, and this is kind of my call for action, is people who want to try this approach in practice and try to apply it in the real world. This is just one example that I worked on, a project that I worked in, and it was actually very interesting. It was closer to bring this to the real world, still yet quite academic. So it was a master graduation I supervised. So the work was from Siu Nam, and she currently works at Clever and Frankel. And but for this project, she collaborated with Lucid Minds. And Lucid Minds is a company that tries to address interrelated challenges of climate change and social inequalities by challenging the traditional carbon tunnel vision and leveraging a system approach. They were part of this project called Trees AI. And it's like a digital twin of an urban forest. So took the case of the Vliegenbos, a forest here, an urban forest here in Amsterdam. And first she tried to understand all the kind of needs and different desires of the different humans and non-humans that they were there. And then what she did was to propose actors for their agent-based model. So it's not the same kind of AI perhaps we're talking about here because it's not machine learning as maybe it's more commonly known, but it's an agent-based model. And what she did is to propose new agents to the model that were not only the trees and their growth, but also glowworms and other organisms that live there. So what she created was a sort of interface. So the policymakers and the people who have to make decisions about their forest, they could choose which agents to consider when they're making these decisions. So she designed an interface for understanding relations among these actors and use that to make decisions that are not only based on human needs. So ultimately, I think there should be a bridge. Academic research in this field should learn also from what is going on out there. So if anyone has any case that could be relevant to try a more than human design approach, or that has been doing this, even if it has a different name, then come talk to me. Because I think there is a thing that is changing right now, for me at least. More than human design has always been proposed as an alternative to human-centered design. But I think it's time to explore a different position, in which more than human design stands not in opposition, but as an affirmative reorientation of human-centered design. And this is because I believe that the work of many of you are doing around human-centered design is already going into this direction anyway. I think we all care about how to make design more sustainable and inclusive. So I see an opportunity to think about the design of technology as a series of convergence. One is the convergence between human-centered AI and more than human design, and how this can converge, this critique of anthropocentrism and humanism. And I think it's nice to think of this convergence as a regenerative approach. For me, regeneration, and this is kind of the last idea I will present, for me, regeneration is moving beyond traditional notions of sustainability that measure environmental harm or try to reduce it. It is about actively creating conditions where both humans and non-humans' lives can thrive. A regenerative human culture is healthy, resilient, adaptable, it cares for the planet, and it cares for life in the awareness that this is the most effective way to create a thriving future for all humanity. So it puts the question of what is to be human at the center. But it's not the human that is the master of the planet, but just part of it. So my question is, how can we become better participants on this planet? And so I hope these contributions spark new critical questions for everyone that designs technology, but also for anyone that interacts with it. And I think this is very crucial in the times we live in, because by designing technology, we are not only transforming things, but we are also transforming the planet and also ourselves. Technology shapes what it means to be human and also what it's not. So ultimately, I hope this will inspire you to engage with more than human design or other alternative approaches to move towards a more inclusive and sustainable future. Thank you.
So many questions, so little time. So I'm going to ask you, you built a more than design human bot. You made your own large language model. Show us, tell us.
That was an experiment. I wasn't sure if I should show it, but
of course you have to show it.
Yeah, I should show it. So this is also an experiment we did last year with Joe, and this is like a chatbot that uses more than human design theory and has conversations, and it has different agents. So if you want to try it, I think it's really fun. It's like the idea was to translate all this theory into practical kind of design ideas. So by interacting, you can talk about your project, and it will kind of reinterpret it through more than human design.
Okay, so we can somebody shout something about their project and we put it in and see what comes out? Yeah, okay. Anybody?
Oh, no, this is just a screenshot.
Oh, gosh. Damn.
But you can try it yourself.
Oh, I tried for yourself, put in your project and thing. I like, by the way, how you mention a lot of people just by the first name, because it's the community of people that works on the same ideas and projects, right? Okay, we can have one question from the audience. I know you're super shy, all of you, but if there is somebody who wants to ask a question, now would be the time. Okay. All right. I think the one question is, and we'll hear more about that later on, is designing new things with AI, with a non-human perspective. The follow-up, that might be the follow-up to this whole event, is the regenerative thing. You already mentioned it at the end. Do you think AI will be a huge help there, or are we just going to do so many more things now that we can? It's getting so easy also to design with AI and do. I mean, it's a disaster for the planet, right?
Yeah, I think that's why it's so interesting to think not only about generative AI, but regenerative. So how can AI be used to regenerate this planet? This is not just about thinking how we can make less harm, but really how can we be better participants? How can we actively contribute? Yeah. So I think it's a balance to think how can AI contribute to regenerative design, but also how these ideas that were developed already in other fields can help us to design AI that is more sustainable and inclusive.
And then this is my last question. The new design principles that you describe are obviously super useful for designers here that have the same sort of perspective as you have. But can you also find people at the really big AI companies that start to understand this and work with them? Because I think there's a lot of room for development.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, my PhD was funded by Microsoft Research in the UK, and I've been having conversations with them about this, and I visited different labs in Boston, in New York, in the UK, and they have these same questions, and it's hard for them to adopt such an approach. It's like it feels like really big for them, especially after it took so long to do human-centered AI. But they are interested in the same values. They want to get the same result. That's why I say it's not the only approach, but I think we really need different approaches that realize that we should not center only on humans, but really look at it at humans in relations to others and the planet.
All right. Thank you so much. Big applause for Iohanna.